Brought to you by Friends, Counsel, and Agnes. TrusteeU, your online governance program for trustees.
Now this kind of three ways of thinking in the boardroom, trimodal thinking, the fiduciary, strategic, and generative, is not necessarily easy. Getting your board to engage differently and think differently, there are some impediments to it. The number one impediment that I hear consistently is time. We don't have time for that. That takes way too much time. Well, you can make time if you use your time better. And so what I encourage boards to do is think about, what are we doing that we really don't need to talk about in the boardroom? One of them is committee reports. If we're sitting there listening to report after report after report, this is not a good use of our time. You can send those out in advance, people can read them in advance, they can even ask questions online in advance. You don't have to have a conversation to listen to committee reports. That's not the reason to bring the board together. Yes, they may have to check those boxes and say, we did that, the committee's met, and we understand that. The idea here is we want to use our time differently. So have a consent agenda, put all those items up front, check the box, and then what do we want to have a deep dive conversation on? What is really critical to our organization at this point in time? And that's where we want to move to right away. A second impediment to this kind of work is to get that critical thinking going as a group. It is a challenge. Think about it. Most of us don't want to think critically as an individual, let alone as a group. How do we get that done? So what we found to be a good thing to do here is to actually send insightful questions out to the board in advance, along with some data and information, a background reading. So here's the question we want to take up in a deep dive conversation. We're going to spend 35 minutes, an hour, whatever the case may be at our board meeting on this central issue. Here's the key question that we'd like you to be thinking about, because we want you to come in and engage around that question. And here's some information that we think would be helpful if you read as a backdrop to that, so we all have a common framework, some background information on the issue, but we know what the critical question is, so that we can do some of that deep thinking before we get to the boardroom, so we're ready to engage in dialogue. I think that another impediment to doing some of this work is simply trying to get people to really dialogue and be comfortable with the dialogue. And Robert's Rules of Order doesn't really work well in this. And so some boards, that's all they're used to. They're used to raising their hand and being called on by the board chair and going in order. What this is more about, it's not a free-for-all, and it's not blue sky, and it's not brainstorming, but it's engaging in a deep dialogue, which suggests that we're going to play off of what other people are saying and thinking. We're going to draw from, you know what, I want to pick up on something that Sue said and build on something that Bob said, and here's how I'm thinking about it. And so it does take some practice and skill to get the board used to dialoguing differently. And it does take some leadership with the board chair to ensure that you're bringing on that kind of dialogue. But once boards do it and they get comfortable with it, they so much more enjoy board meetings. And the head of school is getting so much more out of the conversation, that it's not just sitting there listening to reports or rubber stamping something that somebody else said, that there's true engagement. And that's what gets people excited, and you have better outcomes. And then by then having better dialogue, you also tend to get to better decisions.